Hello everyone, this is Jim Lewis, President of the Lewis Institute, and I'd like to welcome you to our webinar on how to get your PMP or CAPM. Your instructor today is George Hollins, who is a professional engineer and also obviously a PMP himself. And George has been teaching a seminar on how to get your PMP for several years now and has a pretty high success rate doing this. In fact, 99.9% success. So he obviously knows what he's talking about, and I hope that this will be useful to you. It's noon by my clock, and if you haven't downloaded your handouts yet, they are at the link shown on the welcome slide there. The one on the welcome notice, I noticed had a dot at the very end of it, and if you don't remove the dot, it won't download. So if you have had trouble with that, just delete the dot in your browser window and it should download just fine. We will also send you a registration number in an email in about 2 weeks so that you can claim your PDU for this class. It takes PMI a little bit of time to get these things registered, so it'll be about 2 weeks, and we will notify you by email that it's available. I'm going to turn the program over to George, and it'll take me just a second to do that. And George, it's all yours.
Okay, thank you, Jim. I appreciate that. And thank you, everybody, for being here today. We'll get this PowerPoint presentation up and running. As Jim said, I've been teaching the PMP prep course for quite a few years now, and it's been a lot of fun. Had a lot of people come through, and we've had some relative success. So we'll try to share some of that today and give you a broad overview of all that we can do in an hour. And we'll get started. So as Jim said, I'm George Hollins, licensed engineer, PMP. I'm a independent trainer. I work with Jim, doing consulting, coaching, those kind of things quite a bit. My previous positions, I've been the University of Iowa business manager for the past 8 years, and before that, their director for design and construction, and then I was the city engineer for West Des Moines. So a lot of basic engineering experience. I also have done software installation projects and a lot of organizational improvement projects. So kind of a very variety of project types, and had a lot of fun doing those, and did the math one time, and it was interesting that over $1 billion in value that I had been responsible for. So I've done a few projects and have some familiarity with a lot of different problems, I could say, too. So moving right along with this, what we hope to do today is we'll go through and talk a little bit about what the PMP and the CAPM designations are, and then how we get them, and then we're going to go through a quick overview of the project management body of knowledge, and some of the definitions, how their process groups are arranged, what their knowledge areas are, and then just a quick overview of their processes, just to give you a flavor of what you might expect as you move towards the PMP. The PMP is the Project Management Professional designation, really reserved for project managers, as opposed to the CAPM, which is a Certified Associate in Project Management, which are for those people that are more or less getting started in the field of project management and don't quite have their hands-on project management experience yet. What these do, and this is really becoming more important as we move through time here, is the PMP and the CAPM are providing a standard in our large global economy for project management standard. And getting a PMP and a CAPM, it basically says you have qualified, or you have the credential to be a project manager, or you're on track to manage projects. It can lead to advancement in your career, promotions, possibly where you are now. Might help you with some job security issues. I'm seeing where there's a lot more requests for people that have these certifications in job announcements and in job descriptions. So they're becoming a a lot more prominent as we move more into our global economy. The reason I got mine originally was mostly for the personal satisfaction. I wanted to get it for what it made of me, to learn the processes and learn about project management, and just have really one more certification, one more feather in my cap, so to speak. So it's a good thing to learn. It's really good information that a person can use in their life as well as in their project life. A little bit about the Project Management Institute. It's PMI, as we all know. The PMI is a leading membership organization for project managers in the world. Over 500,000 members now in 185 countries. And really important with regard to our PMP is that PMI is the keepers of that certification process for the PMP and the CAPM. And they keep the standard updated, and they keep the credential fresh, so to speak. So we talked a little bit about the project management body of knowledge. What is that document? What does it look like? What is it all about? So it's called the PMBOK guide, and that's what I'll refer to it to as we go through the next hour. And the PMBOK guide is the project management body of knowledge, which is a global standard for successful project management. And what that means is that the experts and long-time project managers, people that have done a lot of project work, generally agree that the things within the PMBOK are good practices for managing projects. And so it's not a methodology. It doesn't have step 1 through step 20, and if you follow those steps, you're a good project manager. What it does, it gives you the raw materials, the inputs, the standards for you to build into your methodology, and you build into your project processes, so you know you've checked off all the boxes and you've done things according to a standard that is generally accepted around the world, not unlike generally accepted accounting principles or something like that. We are working with the 4th edition that was put out in 2008. PMI generally updates these about every 4 years, so should be expecting something coming along at some time in the future. Okay, and to take it right from PMI, the way they talk about the PMBOK guide is they say here, in recognizing that project success can be impacted by the application of appropriate knowledge, processes, skills, tools, and techniques. So they're saying that they know successful projects come out of the proper application of tools and techniques. They put this standard together so that more of us can deliver our projects within those constraints that we've established. Okay, so how do we get one of these PMPs? And we'll do the same. We'll talk a little bit about the CAPM too. So how do we get one? And we have to qualify, first of all, by our training and the experience that we have. And that allows us the opportunity to take the test. And then we pass the PMP test, and then which we'll all do, and no problems there. And then after you've passed the test, then there's a continuing education requirement that we have to complete to continue to hold the PMP. And the CAPM, in a similar way, we have to qualify by training or experience. And we'll get into the details here in a minute on both of these. And of course, we have to pass the CAPM exam. And then what's different then is there isn't a continuing education requirement for CAPM, but what there is we have 5 years the certification lasts for 5 years, and then after that we're going to have to either recertify, or what we're all hoping is that we'll have that project management experience now, and we can take the PMP and move into professional project management certification. So how do I qualify for the PMP exam? The first thing we have to have is there's 2 scenarios here. The first one is a bachelor's degree and 3 years project management experience with documented 4,500 hours leading projects. And so you have to produce documentation that you've got the 4,500 hours of direct project management experience. And then, of course, there's 35 hours of project management education required, which, there's various classes a person can take. There's one that is coming up, I'll mention here at North Carolina State University, an online class that I'll be actually facilitating and presenting. That is September 4th through September 27th in the evenings, 8 to 9 p.m. Eastern Time, and that's Tuesday and Thursday evenings. And so we'll do that online, instructor-led, and that's one way to get towards some of the credits you need for the 35. The other way is without the bachelor's degree is if you have a high school diploma, 5 years project management experience, but you need 7,500 hours documented that you can show that you've been leading projects. And then, of course, the 35 hours of project management education. And I should say that that 35 hours usually comes from 2 classes. There's a fundamentals class, fundamentals of project management, that a person really should have, and then the PMP exam study course class is usually about 18 hours. So between the 2 classes, the person gets to 35. Okay, for the CAPM exam, a little less rigorous with regard to requirements. High school diploma, 15 hours of professional experience on a project team, and then the high school diploma and 23 hours of formal education. Here's the cost for the PMP exam. The computer-based test is a computer-based test, $405, and that's if you're a PMI member. Non-members are $555. It pays to, as you can see here from the slide, it pays to become a PMI member. Estimated $129 for membership there, and be a PMI member and pay for the test and take advantage of that discount. CAPM, PMI members are $225, non-members $300. So again, there's a good discount there for becoming a member of PMI. As you look at the structure of the PMP exam, it's a 4-hour exam. There's 200 questions on it, but only 175 of those are scored. So there's 25 there they use for statistically validating the questions. You have to go through and take them, but they don't count towards your final score. So 175 of those are scored. And as we go into the webinar today, we're going to talk about these process groups that I'm showing here. But the PMI process groups are initiating, planning, executing, monitoring and controlling, and closing. And you'll see how the test is broken down percentage-wise, tracking those process groups. And so there's a lot of the test that's in the executing. You can see 30% of it, with 24 and 25% respectively in planning and monitoring and controlling. So there's a lot of, let's just say, meat in the middle, where a lot of the processes reside. And that's the PMP. When we look at the CAPM exam, I've broken it down here by chapters in the PMBOK. And you can see again that as we start to get in to the PMBOK guide, and you can look at these chapters in your own PMBOK, but you can see it's fairly evenly distributed across most of this, most of the PMBOK. And again, the CAPM is a 3-hour test of 150 questions, with only 135 of those being counted. Okay, so the PMBOK guide obviously is very important because it serves as the standard, and it serves as the basis of what our test comes from. But the other thing we need to realize is there's more to it than just that. There's also project management is more than just managing projects. There's a lot of people-oriented things. I call them the complex skills. You know, we used to call these things the soft skills, but I don't think they're soft. When you're dealing with people, they're a lot more complex, especially in our global economy. So you need to know more than just the PMBOK. There's some questions on that test about general management concepts, some other ones that come out of just good project management practices, which is why taking a good fundamentals class like North Carolina State's Tools, Principles, and Practices class is a very good thing. Those project management practice tips and techniques will really help you also on the test. And then the other thing I always tell people is practice, 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 because the test is a lot of pretty rigorous questions, and the more test questions you take and the more problems you work, the better off you're going to be. Other things that are on the test not so oriented towards the PMBOK are communication, which you can break that down into active listening, conflict management and resolution, and negotiation. And we won't get into those a lot today in detail, but just to put them out there as things that you need to know a little bit about, and we do cover those in the full class. There's also leadership things. You know, project management, as I said, is a complex skill because you're dealing with people. And facilitating meetings and facilitating people to accomplish their pieces of your project are a very difficult thing sometimes. And so there's portions of the test that are going to ask you questions about getting things done through people, and that includes facilitation, that includes motivation, relationship issues, how do we influence people, how do we get things done when we don't have direct authority. There'll be some things about that in there. And then just working in teams. What's the best way to handle teams, manage teams, things like that. So there'll be some general questions about complex skills that aren't really covered in the PMBOK, but there will be some questions about those on the test. Okay, so as we look into the PMBOK guide, the way that it's set up is in the very beginning, as anything, we need to study the foundation. And the PMBOK guide begins with an overview of the foundation of a lot of definitions and general concepts having to do with project management. And so we would look through and go through those definitions, things like what is a project, what is the definition of project management. And one of the things that I tell students all the time about these is we think we have our own definitions of what a project is or what project management is or what these very basic things are, but they have to line up with what the project management body of knowledge is calling out. We need to make sure that we're taking a test for PMI certification about PMI's body of knowledge, so we want to make sure we learn their definitions for project and project management and things like that. So these definitions and general concepts come right from the PMBOK, and that's the ones that you really want to learn. The PMBOK then moves into talking about what's called process groups. They make the distinction, and they make this real clear, that these process groups, they look like they could be a project life cycle. And we'll talk about that in a minute, but they're not, and you have to know that they are the process groups that group different processes together, but they're really not a life cycle. That's a whole other thing, and we'll talk about that too. And that trips a lot of people up, getting the process groups confused with being life cycle. Knowledge areas are the specific areas that we all, in every project, whether you're planning a wedding or planning a dinner party or planning to put a person on the moon, you're going to check off all of these knowledge areas. You're going to go through them, and you're going to have to think about them. And we'll go through them here in a minute and tell you about what they are. And then there's just the processes that fit between the process groups and the knowledge areas. That there's 42 processes that we use to manage our projects. So we'll talk about those. And then there is a section about professional responsibility. Is as project managers in a profession, just like engineers and architects and doctors and accountants and everyone else, there's codes of ethics and levels of responsibility that the profession is held to. And that part of the test is very important. It's now more woven into questions throughout the test instead of a separate section, but it's covered in the PMBOK now as something we read separately and learn, and very important stuff. Okay, so I mentioned this about a project and what the definition is. I just want to show you a few of these definitions as we go through. And this is my point here is we all have different things that we think about when we think of a project, but PMI has their specific definitions, and here's one of them. So a project is a temporary endeavor undertaken to create a unique product, service, or result. Temporary meaning it has a definite beginning and end. And so it has a start and a stop, and that's our schedule. And it's a unique thing. It's a one-time effort. We're not going to do it a million times over, like producing a can of soup off of an assembly line. It's a one-time effort. It might be creating the assembly line, that one-time thing that we do that's unique. And of course, it has a purpose, is we're doing this thing for a specific result that we can identify. And so that definition is one, of course, that you'd have to know, and you'd have to be prepared to answer on the PMBOK test. But just kind of gives you an example of what that is. And as we get through there, I'm going to show you a few more of them just to kind of get you an idea of how the thing's organized. So there's the project. There's also a program. And you have to know the difference between a project and a program, which is a group of related projects that are managed in a coordinated way so we can obtain benefits that we wouldn't obtain otherwise. And so you can see a program is that group of projects. It may be all projects in California, or maybe all projects having to do with a certain type of software or something like that, or they're related together as pieces of some, say it's the pieces of an airplane that the project is. But all of those together are your program. Those roll up even further to a collection of projects that's called a portfolio. I should say a collection of projects and programs. And a portfolio is an organization's collection of that group of projects and programs that are collected together to meet strategic business objectives. And so those have the bigger picture strategic business objectives, which is different from grouping a program just to obtain benefits from better coordination. So you'll see that those are a couple of definitions a person would have to learn. Another thing that's in there in the very beginning that we all would have to know and spend some time on are the definitions of some of these roles. Here I've got some listed that you'd have to take a look at. You have to know the definition of a project manager as opposed to a project coordinator or a project expediter. And those have to do with the maturity of an organization, and they have to do with an organization's basic organizational structure, whether you're organized as a matrix organization, or you might be organized as a projectized organization. Those are things that kind of dovetail and match up with these various descriptions of roles. You have to know who senior management is. And a good way to think of senior management is anyone more senior than the project manager. That's a good definition for going into the test. Functional managers. We don't always have authority over everyone in our project team. They might report back to a functional manager, like the head of engineering, or the director of HR, or the director of insurance or something, accounting. And so there's functional managers. You have to know who they are. The stakeholders. And you have to know there's positive stakeholders and negative stakeholders. And they're people generally that are affected by the project and have an interest in the results and the requirements. The sponsor, I always tell people, sponsor-wise, if you follow the money, you'll find the sponsor. Sponsor is usually the person that is agreeing to the project, to initiate the project, which means they're agreeing to pay for it. So that's another way to look at the sponsor. And then a program manager is usually someone, when you're thinking about a program manager, you're thinking about who does a project manager have to report a lot of their work performance information to. And a lot of that's going to go to the program managers so they can coordinate that with the other projects that are in the program. But these are just a few roles. I'm just giving you examples of some definitions that are things that you need to know for the PMP or the CAPM. And so moving along in the PMBOK, so we get through the definitions. We've kind of given you an overview of those. As you move through, I mentioned that there was a system of process groups and a system of knowledge areas. And what there is there's a fundamental structure from which everything in the PMI material really emanates from. And it is 5 process groups and 9 knowledge areas. And there's a handout there in your downloaded program that's a matrix that shows these. And I'm going to show it here in a minute, but I want to talk just for a second about these, and then we'll pull it up and kind of show it to you. But the process groups are across the top of that matrix sheet, if you see it there, and the knowledge areas are down the left-hand side. And within those, in between them, there's 42 processes that PMI has identified as good practice in project management. And I mentioned before that these knowledge areas and these process groups, it doesn't matter whether you're planning a wedding or you're planning a dinner party or you're planning a family vacation or you're planning a major construction project or putting a person on the moon, you're going to think in your mind or you're going to check off a list just about every one of the 42. And if you don't, you're at risk for missing something. And on the wedding and the little small stuff, you may not go through formally and do anything there, but you're thinking about it. And just that little thing, who do I need and what should they be doing and what do I have to buy and what's the risk involved in that and what's my schedule look like? And you'll see the 42 processes. Here's our process groups. And I mentioned before that we don't want to confuse these with being the project life cycle. And that's one thing PMI will look to test you on, whether you know that these are simply process groups. And they are progressively elaborated, which means as you move through a project, you learn more. And you may initiate several times in a project for different phases. And you may have to come back and change some of your planning. And you may be in the middle of execution and discover that something didn't go as well as it should, and I do have to go back and change my planning documents. So it generally gives you an idea of the processes that you go through, with initiation being the first one. Then you're going to do some planning. Planning allows you to move into executing, because executing is just executing the project management plan that you've created. Monitoring and controlling is looking at the project management plan you created in planning and making sure that where you are in the execution is lining up with that project management plan. And if it's not, and you have a variance, then we need to go back and do some changes in the project so that as we move forward, we're able to take in any variances into account. And then closing, which is a very important step, is there to allow us to learn from the project primarily, transition our deliverables to the stakeholders or customers or sponsors and primary stakeholders, and then move on to the next project. So those are our process groups. They're across the top of our matrix in the handout there. And then down the left-hand side are the knowledge areas, which are focused areas of processes that break out and allow us to really manage our project. The first one there is integration management, which is a big picture one. We'll go through them here in a minute. Scope management, obviously managing a piece of the triple constraint, making sure that we deliver that scope that we've identified. Time management has to do with our schedule. Cost management has to do with our budget. Quality management We have to make sure the deliverables meet the specifications that we've required and meet the requirements that the stakeholders have established. Human resource management, who do we need? Do we have the right people? Do we need to go outside and get the people? Do we need to develop the people? And then, of course, we have to manage them. Communications management, very important. 90% of project management is communications. And so communications, we're looking at that saying, first of all, who do we have to communicate? And then given that group of people that we have to communicate with, what kind of information do they need and when do they need it? And then given our global project teams, how are we going to get it to them? And so we're thinking about all those things. Another really important process we'll look at in a minute here too that fits into communications management is managing stakeholder expectations. And one of the best things I can mention to people for advice is when you're doing communication planning in this area, make sure you're thinking ahead about what those stakeholders are expecting, because it's no fun to get there and have an expectation that you haven't met. Risk management, an obvious one. That's why we do project management, is to manage those risks. And so we'll be those processes allow us to identify the risks, give them a relative ranking, come up with ways that we're going to respond to any risks, and then of course we're monitoring and controlling to make sure that those risks aren't the triggers aren't coming to us. And then procurement management, one that we don't think about a lot, which is really important, is how do we buy things? How do we get the services and the scope that we need for projects? So these are the knowledge areas that match up with the process groups. 42 processes that fit into it. And I'm just going to step away from the PowerPoint for just a minute and show you that matrix just to make sure you have it in your hands here. So see if we can get this going here. I know this is too small to see and read, but look for this in your handouts because you should all have it there. I just want to show you on this that the process groups are across the top. And so here are those process groups: initiating, planning, executing, monitoring and controlling, and closing. Not a life cycle, but a grouping of processes. Down the left-hand side are our knowledge areas that I mentioned. And we have techniques for memorizing these. And that's another thing I should mention is one of the things I tell people that are moving towards taking the PMP and the CAPM is you really need to memorize this matrix here. And we give you techniques for being able to memorize it. And I say the first thing you do when you walk into the test is grab your pencil and your piece of paper and recreate this chart. And you'll have it memorized and you'll be able to do that. But you can see here the knowledge groups are all in order. There's integration, scope management, time, cost, quality, human resources, communications, risk, and procurement. And so they're all down this left-hand side. The 42 processes that we mentioned a minute ago are all in here. And you can see this is a matrix where you can come down, here in initiation, you can come down to this process that's in the integration knowledge area. And this is develop project charter. And so you know that develop project charter is in the initiation group. It's the first thing we do in integration management. And so you can see these processes are all throughout. So there's 42 of them. I'm going to move back to the PowerPoint, but you can grab that handout and you can kind of follow through as we go through the next few PowerPoint slides. So 42 processes that you have to know. And I think if you look at this, there's inputs to processes, there's tools and techniques, and there's outputs. And so what you have to remember is an input to a process is like an input to a recipe. It's the raw materials coming in. So you're baking a cake. There's going to be inputs to this process where this process may have the cake mix coming in and all the things that comprise the raw materials and the ingredients. Then through your mixing bowl and a little effort and your oven, tools and techniques, They're able to create the output, which in our recipe example might be our cake. And so these processes, every one of the 42 processes has inputs that you need to know, has tools and techniques that shape and process our inputs to create outputs. And for instance, we talked about that first process being develop project charter. What do you all think the logical output of develop project charter would be? Well, the output there would be a project charter. And so there's tools and techniques that we would use to create that charter. And there's going to be some inputs that we would think about and that would help us to create through those tools that project charter. And so that's how this PMBOK is set up for the 42 processes. And when you think about the inputs, tools, techniques, and outputs, there's over 500 total inputs, tools, and techniques and outputs that a person would have to know. And we go through them so that there's a systematic way of understanding those and logically knowing what they are. So we do work with you on that. So here's an example of what those things are. So inputs, like we said, they're the basic, specific and unique building materials for a process. The tools and techniques transform and create the outputs. And then the outputs are documents or services, or they could be the deliverables, the product that emerge from this work of the tools and techniques. And one thing to remember as you go through the PMP and the CAPM studies is that these outputs from processes are very often the inputs for other processes. So yeah, we've created a project charter. Now when we go and we start developing our project plan, it's pretty logical that that project charter should be an input to developing the project plan. So that's an example of how the flow of some of these processes works. Okay, so I'm going to whip through these pretty quick because I know we don't have time and we're not getting into a lot of detail. But so initiating, that first process group has two processes in it. So the initiating process group has the develop project charter and identifying stakeholders. And you have to keep in mind that initiating may take place quite a few times on complex projects, and you want it to. You want to have, in a project that's complex, many breaks in there for different phases, so you can have, I'm going to stop, I'm going to catch my breath, I'm going to evaluate whether we want to go ahead and do this project or not, so that you don't go right past the budget and down past zero and get yourself in trouble. So you want to have some stop gaps in there, some stop gates where you evaluate. So you may initiate a project several times for big complex projects. But so there's initiating that has just the two process. You get into planning, and very important process for the test. 20 processes from this planning process group, 20 of the 42 are here. And you can see them all on the handout there that I showed you, that matrix. And so when you look at this, outputs from a lot of processes are often inputs into this one. As a matter of fact, the develop project plan process has outputs from 8 knowledge areas that come into it alone, and of 15 things that comprise the project management plan, just to give you an example. Executing, this is where heavy lifting happens. This is where our plan is carried out, and there's 53 test questions over these 8 processes, generally. And so you have to think, okay, of the 200 I'm going to be taking, 53 of them are right here. So a fourth of the test might be over this one area. And what I like to tell people is this is a pretty intuitive thing. If you think this is where the work gets done, and you're actually doing things that way, a lot of this is pretty, like I say, pretty intuitive as you go through the test study. Okay, the monitoring and controlling process group is what, like I said earlier, it's comparing the actual, so where you are, to where you plan to be. And if the two don't line up and you have a variance, then you have to decide what kind of an adjustment you're going to make. And so in that monitoring and controlling area, things are being measured and inspected and reviewed and compared and monitored. And if you start thinking that way, you'll be able to identify a lot of the things that go on there. And you're looking backwards in monitoring and controlling so you can fix things in the future. That's another little tip to be thinking about as you move through. And there's 10 processes here with 42 questions, so another real heavy area. Closing, it's more than just the client signing off. It's something that we have to realize. 18 questions for only 2 processes. I would think there might be some low-hanging fruit here. The thing I like to tell people in closing is this is where your lessons learned piece happens. And lessons learned to me are like compound interest. If you fix processes within your methodology and within your organization, and then you continue to review lessons learned upon lessons learned over the years, over time, when you keep fixing things, pretty soon, like compound interest, you have a system that works so strong that no one else can compete with you. And so this closing process group has some things in it that are really important. Okay, the knowledge areas, I list them again here. We're going to go through them quickly, and here's integration management. There's 6 processes across that handout. You'll see them there. And this is coordinating all the parts of the project, is what we do in integration management. What you'll notice about the processes here are they're larger and they're more substantial than some of the others because they're big picture and comprehensive. We're integrating across the whole project. And so these systems that are developed throughout some of the planning process group in integration management, the project management plan, gives the project manager a lot of authority and a lot of opportunity to make decisions during execution without the team. So project manager can go back to the work done in this planning process group under integration, which is creating the plan, and recognize that this is a guide for them to execute the project. Last note here, integration management also contains the change control process, which recognizes for a term called progressive elaboration that I mentioned before, which is a PMBOK PMI-ism. You'll see this thing a few times on the test. Progressive elaboration means you learn more as you go through the project, and you have to go back and make changes. And so a lot of us are taught, we're locked in up front and says, okay, this is all there is, you got to do this. But PMI says, no, with progressive elaboration, as you move forward and move through a project, you may learn some things that cause you to have to change some things, so you got to go back and look at those. Scope, I'm just going to go through these quickly because we're using up our time here. 5 processes. It defines the requirements of the project, and the philosophy is the project manager should always be in control of the scope through rigid management, and scope changes are handled in a structured, procedured manner. There we go. Time management, 6 processes. This is building the schedule from the ground up. And so we factor in some of the milestone interests and concerns, but we still build our schedule from the bottom up. You have to keep in mind here that the project manager should always be in control of the schedule. And in this section, there is some math that you have to learn. The cost management section, only 3 processes, but there's 13 critical formulas you have to know here. It's some pretty difficult material. And you have to remember that project managers build estimates from the bottom up. And so there's ways that we can do some top-down estimating for general things, but we're going to show you in here and for the test how to build the budget from the bottom up. And so if you think about this, the scope comes first, the schedule second, which allows us to build our budget third from the ground up. Quality management, 3 processes. basically, you're going to use a lot of tools and techniques from the quality industry. TQM, ISO 9000, Six Sigma. We're emphasizing prevention over inspection because it costs more to fix an error than to prevent one. But the project manager is responsible for quality. And so we'll go through the Deming Plan, Do, Check, Act, and then we have to know the differences between these processes. And so that's another thing you have to know. Human resources management, 4 processes. There are some things here that this is where you have to know the roles of people. You have to know the leadership and the motivation we talked about. Because everybody has a role in the project. And the project manager has to make sure everyone understands what their role is and they stay in them. PMs never have complete authority. They get things done through people. And so if the project manager is given responsibility and authority, then they have to turn around and expect from their people reliability and accountability. And the human resources processes help us to get through all of those things. Communication, 5 processes here. And so I mentioned this before. What we're doing in the communication management section is we're determining who needs what kind of communication and how we're going to get it to them, and then how often they need it. It includes status reports. It includes us controlling the information, make sure that only the people that need certain things get those things. It's keeping everybody informed. It's all about what needs to be formal and what needs to be informal, what needs to be written, what needs to be verbal. And then there's a model for communication that PMI has established that shows channels of communication. The more people you add, the more channels of communication you create, and there's an equation for that you have to know for the test. Risk management, 6 processes. We're always in control and proactively managing risks. What we're looking for here is we're going to identify what they are so we can anticipate them. We want to relatively rank them and qualify them. If there's some of them that are more severe, we want to quantify them. We want to do the math and figure out how severe is it. Is it a $3 million problem or a $3 problem? And then we want to plan. How are we going to respond to them? And so we're going to be able to monitor and control as we go and make sure that we're keeping an eye on those things so that we can deal with them. The last point to make here is risks can be good or bad, and we have to know all about that for the test. Procurement, the 4 processes here. How do we obtain the goods and services or scope from outside our organization? You have to think of this as formal government process. That's the best way I tell people, is you can't think of it as going to the store and buying something. You have to think of this as being, what are the formal processes, RFPs and RFQs and things like that we might go through if we were a bigger organization and we were trying to acquire goods, services, or scope. So we always approach these things as being formal. And you also have to know the roles between the buyer and the seller, where the buyer is the party that's procuring the goods, services, or scope, and the seller is that person delivering. Professional responsibility, very important. Not so much question-wise and not a lot of it on the test, but it's very important to all of us in the profession. And you have to know the PM is a leader. Project management deals with issues directly. We're always ethical and legal, always open and upfront. We always ask, what should I do? And then we want to resolve issues quickly, openly, and fairly. We always confront and never ignore. And those are things, you'll see those woven into questions on the test, and we'll need to be able to deal with those. Most importantly, as I mentioned before, study, 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 practice, 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 and things will go really well for you.